I think one of the benefits of a conversation like this is to highlight the fact that income and race make a difference here. You know, the truth of the matter is that poor communities are more vulnerable. One of the useful things about this form is we're all vulnerable, but it's almost like if you're healthy and you get sick, you have more, you know, antibodies and resistance. And if you're poor, or if your body's already weakened and you get sick, then you're more vulnerable, right? There are some communities we know that are more vulnerable, and the kids there are more vulnerable. And part of what I hope this discussion does is to remind us that
being
just
poor
as it could be Malia
doesn't
or Sasha,
make you
or Carrie's
more
kids,
likely to be a criminal or a drug abuser.
or any of our kids.
No.
Those kids who don't always look like us and don't live in the same neighborhood as us, they're just as precious. And their parents aren't.
Abuse leads to poverty. Poverty doesn't lead to
their
abuse.
Parents are much less equipped than you, sir, or I would be in terms of dealing with this stuff. And we got to give them help too. So I think the doctor earlier talked about the importance of jobs and economic development and broad-based approaches so that growth helps everybody. There is some connection to substance abuse and the vulnerabilities that communities have. And we've got, and let's face it, part of the reason West Virginia probably has more cases partly has to do with the economics that have been taking place in some of these communities, which is why it's so important for us to
abuse leads to poverty. Poverty doesn't lead to abuse.
Doctor, any thoughts on that question about the vulnerability of children and how we can get to them quicker, more effectively?
Yes, Mr. President. One of the things that I'm hoping to kick off here next week is a discussion about probably one of the most important studies that most people have never heard of, called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. The baseline study was done with 17,000 people at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, California. And what they found out was that when people score high on a scale of 10 questions, everybody has an ACE score from 0 to 10. The higher you are on that scale, the more likely you are to have problems with addiction, with IV drug use, with smoking, with obesity, with all the public health problems that we're really seeing right now. I think a trauma-informed community and an open discussion about where these problems are going is the first step in addressing why people are using drugs in the first place. And Mr. President, you're absolutely right. What happens in those early years in reaching out to those families who we know are at risk and devoting the kind of resources that we would need to is really the first step, I think, in really truncating this. Because if we don't, what we're going to be doing 25, 30 years from now is having the same discussion about why these kids are abusing drugs, obese, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's a really important part, and to have that sort of open discussion about that, because it happens in good families as well as in families who are disadvantaged. But I agree with you, it happens probably more often in families that are disadvantaged, and it perpetuates the cycle of poverty as well.
Well, and for those of us who are more advantaged, the disadvantaged communities create the markets that then seep into the more advantaged communities, right? So the reason we have a fire department is because if your neighbor's house is burning down, you don't want to just leave it to the neighbor to figure out whether or not he can afford to put out the fire. You have an interest in making sure that fire gets put out before it burns your house. Well, the same is true with drugs. You know, that child who's poor, you may think, well, I don't have to worry about that kid. It's not my kid. My kid's going to be okay. But if you start seeing more and more kids who are more and more involved in the drug trade, over time that migrates into every community. And that's part of the reason why we got to care about every kid out here and make sure they're vulnerable. Chief?
And if I could add also, on that issue to the question, that Handle with Care program, the Ruth Lawn Elementaries, I don't believe it's not in the city of Charleston, but the Handle with Care is about to go statewide if it hasn't. But the Handle with Care program will fix some of those issues. I know we're talking about addiction and maybe some others that are born with addiction. Well, the Handle with Care may not fix that, but it will at least alert the proper authorities that a child is struggling because of some trauma or substance abuse in the home.
I think it was a really smart program. I got to tell you, before I came down, I hadn't heard about it, and I'd really like to see us advertise this more across the country and adopt this as a best practice.
I want to thank everyone for coming